Kanchan, welcome. Kanchan is the store owner for Chamomile. It's a multi-brand outlet which houses a lot of designers.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Mrs. Neeta Lola and Nishka, for inviting me here. Well, as Siddharth was mentioning, I have been one of the founders of Chamomile Retail, which is a small boutique store, multi-designer boutique store in Bombay. We started in Delhi 8 years ago, and it's been a wonderful journey. It's been, it's given me some wonderful insights into the Indian fashion industry, which I briefly want to share with all of you today. Incidentally, the topic that Siddharth asked me to speak on was the scope of Indian fashion in the global market. And initially, I was a bit surprised because I have so far had nothing to do with the global market. And then, I just reflected on it, and I've just put together a few things which I'll share with you before moving on to my understanding of the challenges that young emerging Indian designers face when they start out, and what my recommendations in very simple terms would be to all of them, and then move on to what my challenges as a fashion entrepreneur have been. So hopefully, you'll get to take back something from this short presentation. Regarding the scope of Indian fashion in the in the global market, well, I think the reverse trend has been very strong and has already been happening, which is basically the size of the Indian market is so large. The Indian middle class has emerged like never before in the last, I think, decade or so. And international companies are eyeing the Indian market for, as you've already witnessed, opening up retail stores, bringing brands to India. So all of that is already happening. What about the reverse process? What about Indian fashion going global? And I think it's an opportunity which has not even literally been explored to the extent of like 1 or 5%. There's a huge scope that lies ahead, and I think it's, it can be tapped. The key is in observing and analyzing what is happening in the dynamic international environment. And also two words are very important over here. One is integration and the other one is differentiation. So how do we, with our special skill sets, integrate into the international market, and yet how do we differentiate ourselves and our product, because we are not here to be a me too of everything else that's happening in the international market. So I have traditionally divided it into strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunities. Strengths, as we all know, India has a rich cultural heritage and diversity, and that obviously translates into the textile and surface embellishment sector. I think we've got every state of the country boasts of beautiful fabrics, garments, embroideries, surface texturing, etc. I think y'all would know that better than me. We have very low comparative labor costs if we look at our country, and skilled manpower. We are one of the largest emerging fashion in India is one of the largest emerging sectors. I think you'd agree with me. And the choice of fashion as a career is one of the leading choices for the youth of today. And that, again, is something that is established beyond doubt. Also, India is one of the largest producers of the raw materials of garments, which is cotton, silk, man-made fibers, etc. So these were some of the very obvious strengths that we have, as being Indian designers. The weaknesses are also many, unfortunately. One is, of course, like I have observed, and I'm sure everyone in the unorganized sector has observed, the lack of proper infrastructure for upcoming designers. The lack of proper infrastructure is one of the biggest things that impedes us. Also, when when an international buyer comes to India and compares Indian garments with, let's say, what is sold internationally, Indian garments score high on, again, like I said, embellishments and color and fabric, and the richness, but maybe not so much on the tailoring and so much on the cut. So I think that's one of the weaknesses, that the cutting and tailoring of Indian garments kind of is a little behind the scenes, behind the times, I would say. The other problem is the absence of sizing, and that is felt also in the domestic market, because as a multi-designer store retailer, I find that many times I have to lose sales in my store because one doesn't get either the smallest or the largest sizes. Things are usually made in either a medium or a standard large, and not in an XXL and not in an extra small, and that ends up becoming a challenge. And it could be a much bigger challenge for the international market because they are used to having multiple sizes. That's their format of retailing. The other thing is, of course, our sensibilities and the limited scope of our sensibilities in the international market. Our silhouettes very different from what is functionally okay for someone in the international market. And also, last but not the least, economies of scale, which is again a function of the things that I've spoken about. Economies of scale, lack of economies of scale makes the unit product cost very high, and therefore, the final price to the customer becomes unrealistic. And that again shows in the domestic market. The threats, I would say Chinese product, which is much cheaper, much more sort of suitable to the sensibilities of the international market. Countries like Brazil, which have had a 15-year head start compared to India, and are now established in the international market as exporters, and Brazilian labels are quite well known compared to Indian ones. And I think one of the other threats is lack of consistency. And again, all of these things, like, they're part of the vicious circle where because we don't have organized production, because we have such huge political and economic instability in our country, I think all of that lends itself to lack of consistency of supply, of lead times, of quality, etc. However, one cannot deny that there are a lot of opportunities in this area. And I think, while I was thinking about this, one of the things that I felt was that we don't realize, but there are many Indian trends which have been adapted into the international market slowly. Like, when you look at the tunic, it's an adaptation of the Indian kurta. When you look at the skinny jeans, it's sort of in a way an adaptation of the Indian churidar. And similarly, there are things like polo pants and stuff, which there are many things which I feel, I think that the key lies in following the middle ground of having Indian sensibilities, being true to our roots, and yet creating a product which is truly international in its functionality. So I think that is a huge opportunity which I hope some of you will be able to capitalize on. So this was a little bit about the scope of Indian fashion in the global market. I can of course take questions later based on your queries. My recommendations to young and emerging Indian designers, based on the last 8 years of my observations in this area, I think the starting point is that a designer, when he or she is starting out, needs to have complete focus on and clarity about what is it that they want their identity to be. I often see them spreading themselves out too thin, and it becomes like literally like a first come first served approach, where if you have, let's say, 200 pieces to churn out in a month, then whoever is the first few stores approaching the designer will be given the supply, and there is no proper planning of seasons, of commitment of deliveries, and that is something that becomes a long-term challenge, and kind of creates poses a threat to the designer's long-term success. So I feel a greater focus on what is it that you really want. Is it the media recognition? Therefore, your focus should be more on attending more fashion shows and trade fairs, etc. Or is it more revenue generation, wherein you say that no matter what, I need to feed these number of retailers that I have committed to. So to have your own clarity on what is your roadmap, what is it that you're really trying to achieve, that's something that you really need to bear in mind. Secondly, whichever retailers you decide to collaborate with, to have everything in collaboration with them, whether it is the PR or the marketing, very often what happens is that we get a new collection from a designer, but we have no information on the inspiration behind it, or a press kit that supports it, wherein the retailer themselves can approach their PR agency and say that, look, this is the designer, this is the new designer we have launched, and these are the pictures. Why don't you put them up on our website, or put them up on certain important, like, why don't you do the marketing of this? Because we ourselves don't have the literature to support that. So very often it becomes a difficult exercise to really promote that designer. So it's important for a designer not only to look at the creative and production aspect of their business, but also look at a 360-degree view of how they are doing their promotion, how well are they communicating with the retailers, and things like that. That becomes a very important aspect of their success. Similarly, another area where I feel there's a huge learning required is understanding of financial and business terms when you deal with stores or retailers or any kind of format. I think people just follow, if I may say so, slightly herd mentality, where when you go to, let's say, a fashion week and you go from stall to stall meeting designers, all of them would be like, I will only supply on outright basis. Now, in my understanding as a retailer in the last 8 years, that has in fact becomes sometimes a hindrance to the designers' revenue generation, simply because buying can only happen a few times in a year, and any store, especially a store like me, which is small in size, would be a little conservative with its buying. So it would probably buy worth, let's say, 6 lakhs in a year. Whereas if a designer is confident of their production and supplying a store with regular merchandise based on the feedback of the store, they would end up maybe generating a revenue of 15 to 18 lakhs from the same store, just because they are being able to feed the store with more merchandise and the right merchandise. So I think to have a clear understanding and to discern what really is of value to the designer in terms of financial terms, that is extremely important. Similarly, to understand that the overheads both for the designer and the retailer are significant, and therefore there has to be a healthy balance between the interests of the retailer as well as of the designer. I think just a clear understanding of financial terms and just very, very strong accounting systems would really help. Also, I think, as you must have already heard, investors get attracted by those industries that show growth. So let the lack of capital not become a hindrance for any of you. And at a stage where you feel that you have a plan in place, where you can make a projection a few years from now and say that this is how my brand is going to grow, you are free to approach angel investors and private equity firms and get the kind of funding that you require to pursue your career aspirations. So it's better to, I've realized that it's better to do something in a proper professional manner, have corporate linkages, rather than just having a unstructured sort of a format, because that leads to a lot of inconsistencies again, which I'm going to come to later, which end up affecting the brand image in the long run. Like I mentioned before, sizing options, better tailoring, also controlling production costs. So I think this again is linked with the idea of having organized production, because the other day I was speaking with an industry head, and he said something which I completely agreed with, that for new designers, the kind of pricing they come up with becomes very, very unrealistic for the new customers to accept it. For the established designers, they've established themselves for decades in the market, and therefore they command the price that they do. But for new designers to think that their product will sell just because it's a designer product is a huge misunderstanding. So that is something that upcoming designers need to be aware of. Now, moving on to my experience as a fashion entrepreneur, I have had lots of challenges in the last 8 years, and especially so, I would say, in the last 1 year. I have been surprised by the dynamic change that our industry has gone through in the last 1 year. To name a few of my challenges, one is that there no longer are any contracts of exclusivity between designer stores and designers, which makes it difficult for a brand to become stronger. Because today, if I have, let's say, a set of designers in my store, anyone is free to open another store within the same geographical area and have 70% of the same designers. I cannot stop them. The designer doesn't want to stop them. So it becomes literally a dilution of my own brand. And that is a huge threat right now to my business. Second is low margins. We do not follow international trends where a product that's given to by the designer to the store is marked up 2 to 3x. Of course, their dynamics are also different, but in India, as you all are aware, rental costs have now become prohibitively high. So the moment a business does not generate at least a 20% return on, 20% net margin, you don't feel sort of the motivation to do the business starts to go down. So I think that is something that I'm battling with, and of course I'm going to share with you some of the plans that I have to reverse this whole situation. The other thing which I have already spoken about is inconsistencies, and you'd be surprised that the biggest inconsistency problem we face is inconsistency of communication. Emails are sent, and usually you don't receive timely replies, and so I think it's just about making the attitude more professional. Also the payment terms that I have already spoken about, and last but not the least, which is something that I want to share also with the Nita Lola School of Fashion, is that most fashion schools teach technical skills, they teach whatever is required in terms of the subjects that you need to learn. But the soft skills and the value dimension is missing, and that is the reason why there is a very high degree of employee turnover in the fashion industry. I know that it must be prevalent in other industries also, but in the fashion industry, I see that especially because you have a very high female to male ratio, where being a woman myself, I know that a woman goes through phases of, marriage and, childbirth and things which are, which have to be considered. But what I see is that the frivolity with which people take up and leave jobs is something that is a cause for concern, number one. And second is having a self-motivated approach where no one is there to tell you that you have to do this and this and this today, and that becomes like literally someone like a teacher telling you that you have to finish your assignment today. It has to be a self-motivated approach, and all of these things depend on what a person's own understanding of commitment, transparency, and hard work and responsibility are. And I think this is something that, even though it is something ingrained in us by virtue of our upbringing, but this must be, there must be a dimension like this in fashion schools, and also about soft skills, like how do you present yourself when you go for a meeting with a client, what are the things that you need to bear in mind, and many other parts of communication strategy. Also, I know that now it's becoming a very big thing to teach the students about digital marketing and how to be in the e-commerce space. So these are some of the things that I find challenging. And the way forward, well, some of the things that I'm planning to implement, one is having an in-house label, because backward integration is the way to go. Second is scaling up by, again, doing the same thing, finding corporate partnership and investment, some of the examples of which are Kimaya and Genesis Luxury, etc. Also, I find that being in a mall, initially I thought that my walk-ins are sorted. I'm in a mall, what more do I want? But I realize now that with the kind of instability of our environment in our city, there are buns, there are days when and there are festivals and processions, and there are days that people and there are monsoons, and there are exams, and people just don't want to step out of their homes. And therefore, I have decided that I'm not going to rely on just the walk-ins that come into my store. And of course, the best way to go forward with expanding your geographical boundaries without really having to do so is to be, in the e-commerce space, is to have pop-up stores in the tier 2 cities. The demand there is increasing rapidly. One of the insights that was shared with me by a lady from, I think, Nasik or Pune, she said that don't open a Chamomile in Pune or in Nasik, because then everyone will go there and there'll be no exclusivity. So just have pop-up stores, come for a few days, and let there be, exclusivity. So that's something that I'm planning to do. Just have pop-up stores, international exhibitions, and at the end of the day, a better customer experience. I couldn't agree more with Saket when he said that you need to take care of those 40 to 50% of your core customers, and you really need to nurture them. And that is what is going to, then you really don't even need to rely on your other PR machinery. They are the ones who are going to be just bringing people back. And last but not the least, the passion for being in the business. I think we've reached a point in competitiveness today that unless you are passionately driven and have that fire in the belly about what you really want to do, you will be displaced very soon. So be very true to yourself. This is my suggestion, unsolicited advice to all of you youngsters. Be very true in your motivation. Only because someone's getting famous in the fashion industry is not a reason for you to get into the industry. It is because you truly enjoy the process of creating a garment or creating a product or marketing a product, and you enjoy the process of being in the fashion industry. Only then must you decide to be here. So thank you very much.
Just going forward from what you said about institutes today, I'd like to fill you in with what we at Nita Lula School of Fashion are doing. We are doing exactly what is the deficit of the industry. We are training our students to be in the business of fashion, to be budding entrepreneurs, to be people who are value add rather than employees who are there to learn. Because from my experience as an entrepreneur as well, I share the same feelings as you. And that's why the entire culture of the Nita Lula School of Fashion is to undo what has happened and to get the students geared for what is in store to come. And exactly what you said and what should be implemented, it has been implemented here at the college. So thank you very much.
Thanks, I'm really glad to hear.